10 things about Warren Buffett's life that make no sense for a man worth $150 billion. A man whose net worth is estimated at more than $150 billion doesn't own a single yacht. Not one oceanfront mansion. No private island. No supercar collection. No palace somewhere in Monaco. He still lives in a house he bought almost 70 years ago for an amount that sounds laughable by today's standards. His favorite breakfast costs less than $5 at the register. And until fairly recently, he was still using a basic flip phone that cost about as much as a decent meal. If you didn't know who this was, you'd assume you were reading about an ordinary retiree from Nebraska pinching pennies on everything. Instead, this is one of the richest people on the planet, Warren Buffett, chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, a man whose fortune exceeds the entire annual economic output of whole countries. Today, we're breaking down 10 facts about his personal life. Not his stocks, not the market, not his investment strategy, but how he actually lives day to day, what he eats, how he spends his free time, and most surprisingly of all, what he's actually planning to do with his money after he's gone. Stick around until the end, because the 10th fact is a decision that plenty of people with far smaller fortunes couldn't even imagine making. 1. A house for $31,500. In 1958, at 28 years old, long before becoming a billionaire, Buffett bought a house in Omaha, Nebraska, for $31,500. 5 bedrooms, an ordinary house on an ordinary residential street, built back in 1921, meaning it wasn't even new at the time he bought it. Adjusted for inflation, that amount is roughly equivalent to $285,000 in 2020 dollars. A laughably small sum by today's real estate standards, especially for someone at his level of wealth. And here's the point, he still lives in that exact same house today. He didn't move into a mansion once he got rich. He didn't buy an oceanfront property the way the overwhelming majority of billionaires at his level typically would. He didn't build a gated compound, the way some other prominent entrepreneurs of our era have. He stayed on the same street, in the same city where he grew up. In his own words, that money bought his family more than 50 years of wonderful memories, and clearly the list isn't finished yet. He said more than once that owning half a dozen homes would be more of a burden to him than a pleasure, and that too large a collection of possessions eventually ends up owning its owner, rather than the other way around. 2. An adult billionaire's breakfast that belongs to a 6-year-old. Buffett once explained in an interview that he specifically looked at mortality statistics broken down by age group and noticed something: the lowest death rate belongs to 6-year-olds. His logic was refreshingly simple and a little tongue-in-cheek. If that's statistically the safest age, he figured he might as well eat the way he ate when he was 6. In practice, that means hamburgers, ice cream, and Coca-Cola almost every single day, and pretty much a total absence of anything resembling what we'd call healthy eating today. He drinks around 5 cans of cherry Coke daily, a habit that, interestingly, connects directly to his investment history. Berkshire Hathaway has held a major stake in Coca-Cola since 1988. Buffett often orders breakfast right at the McDonald's drive-thru on his way to work. And here's a fun detail his close friend, Microsoft founder Bill Gates, once shared: the exact order Buffett picks at McDonald's sometimes depends on how well the stock market did that particular day. If results are worse than usual, he'll save a couple of dollars on breakfast, not because he can't afford otherwise, but simply out of long-standing habit. On the road, according to that same Gates, you might find a plain pack of Oreo cookies in Buffett's bag instead of anything fancier. Gates once wrote on his blog that the surprising thing about Buffett is that he's basically stuck to eating what he liked at age 6. He moved past baby food, obviously, but beyond that, his tastes have barely changed. 3. A ukulele on stage in front of thousands of shareholders. Few people expect one of the greatest investors in history to play a small Hawaiian guitar. But Buffett has played the ukulele since his teenage years, and he does it regularly, all the way up to performing on stage at Berkshire Hathaway's annual shareholder meetings, where thousands of people travel from around the world just to hear his thoughts on the market. This isn't a hobby for show or part of some carefully crafted personal brand for interviews. It's something he genuinely enjoys purely because it makes him happy, with zero connection to productivity, investing, or public image. He's also performed with the ukulele at charity events, where he was invited specifically as a performer, not just as an investor. That contrast, one of the most serious and influential financiers on the planet, singing and playing what sounds like a children's instrument in front of an audience, says something meaningful about his character on its own, the ability to stay exactly who he is regardless of status, and not be afraid of looking a little silly in front of people who've entrusted him with billions of dollars. For 8 to 12 hours a week on a card game. Buffett is a self-proclaimed bridge addict, a card game that demands logic, memory, and reading your partner. By various estimates, including an interview with the Washington Post, he devotes up to 8, sometimes 12 hours a week to the game, roughly as much time as many people spend on an entire part-time second job. He once joked in an interview that he wouldn't mind going to prison, as long as he had the right 3 cellmates for a constant game of bridge. He's also admitted, laughing, that he gets so absorbed in the game that if a naked woman walked by while he was playing bridge, he genuinely wouldn't even notice. That's how deeply he sinks into it. For decades, he's played bridge with his close friend, Microsoft founder Bill Gates. Their bridge partnership has become almost as legendary as their business relationship and joint philanthropic work. Buffett himself calls it the best mental exercise available. It requires probabilistic thinking, sharp memory, and the ability to communicate with a partner without words, exactly the same skills that matter when analyzing investment decisions under uncertainty. 5 hours a day just on reading. Every morning, Buffett reads through a physical stack of 5 to 6 newspapers, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, USA Today, and his hometown paper, the Omaha World Herald. All told, by various estimates from colleagues and biographers, reading takes up as much as 5 hours of his day, more than half of a standard 8-hour workday spent simply reading. And it's far from just financial reports. His reading list includes biographies of entrepreneurs and political figures, history books, and subjects often with no direct connection to the stock market at all. In his own words, reading broadly is exactly what gives him new angles of thinking that later turn out to be unexpectedly valuable in investment decisions. There's a well-known story about how, as a young man, he read Chapter 8 of Benjamin Graham's book, The Intelligent Investor, the chapter explaining how to properly think about market price swings. In his own words, that's the moment the scales fell from his eyes and low prices stopped scaring him and started looking like opportunity instead. He's called the moment he picked up that book one of the luckiest moments of his entire life. 6. The rule of 25 and 5. Buffett has a simple personal method for setting priorities that he's used for decades, and it's become one of the most widely quoted productivity tips in the business world. The method works like this. First, write a list of roughly 25 tasks or goals that seem important. Then, pick the 5 most important items from that list. And here's the unusual part of the method. Buffett advises completely ignoring the remaining 20 items on the list until the first 5 are done. Not occasionally checking in on them, not trying to squeeze in a little time for secondary tasks along the way, but fully removing them from your attention, as if they didn't exist at all. That's the exact opposite of how most people try to work a little on everything at once, hoping that spreading attention across a long list will lead to progress on all fronts. Buffett considers that approach ineffective. In his logic, the 20 secondary items on the list are actually the biggest enemies of progress on the 5 items that truly matter because they quietly steal time and attention. 7. He goes to bed early and never works at night. Unlike the popular image of an entrepreneur burning the midnight oil, solving hard problems deep into the night by the glow of a monitor, Buffett has kept an extremely predictable sleep schedule for more than 60 years straight. In his own words, he goes to bed early and never tries to solve complicated problems in the middle of the night because the exact same problems are solved far better in the morning with a clear head after a full night's rest. No biohacking, No special sleep supplements, no elaborate 10-step nighttime ritual of the kind modern productivity books love to teach. Just a stable, boring, predictable routine that hasn't changed in decades. And, judging by the results of his career, has done its job perfectly well the entire time. 8. A $20 phone and a car with a thrifty license plate. As recently as 2019, one of the richest people on the planet was using a basic Samsung flip phone that cost around $20 instead of any of the latest smartphone models available at the time, essentially without any budget constraint at all. A similar story applies to cars. For roughly a decade, he drove a car with a license plate that literally read thrifty, a kind of public statement of his own philosophy right there on the bumper. He prefers inexpensive, reliable cars, puts relatively few miles on them, and replaces them rarely, a stark contrast to the supercar collections other billionaires at his level like to show off. This fits into a broader philosophy he's stated publicly more than once. Possessions exist for practical use, not as status symbols to impress people around you. He said plainly that owning half a dozen homes would be a burden to him rather than a pleasure, and that too large a collection of possessions eventually ends up owning its owner, rather than the other way around, a thought he's repeated in different forms over the decades. 9. The one genuine luxury he actually allowed himself. For all that deliberate modesty, Buffett does have one notable and fairly amusing exception: a private jet. In 1986, he bought a used plane for $850,000 and 2 years later sold it and bought another one, this time for $6.7 million. What's genuinely interesting is that Buffett openly admitted, even with a bit of self-deprecating humor, to an internal conflict over this in his letters to shareholders. At first, he jokingly named the jet the Indefensible, comparing the rapidly rising cost of private planes to bacteria multiplying out of control, a metaphor his longtime business partner, Charlie Munger, jokingly called insulting to the bacteria. Buffett even referenced a well-known prayer about asking for patience before giving up worldly pleasures, admitting his own attitude toward the jet could be summed up in a similar way. Something like, "Help me give up this luxury, but not just yet." A few years later, in another letter to shareholders, he honestly admitted that the thought of giving up the jet felt even more revolting to him than the thought of someday retiring as chairman, and he ultimately renamed the plane from the Indefensible to the Indispensable. 10. The most important one: 99% of his fortune isn't going to his kids. And now the fact that surprises people the most, the one worth sticking around for. Buffett has publicly stated his intention to give away 99% of his entire massive fortune to charity, either during his lifetime or immediately after his death, rather than leaving that money directly to his children as traditional inheritance. His decades-long friendship with Bill Gates played a real role in that decision. Together, they created a public initiative called the Giving Pledge, which dozens of other billionaires around the world have since joined, voluntarily promising to give away the majority of their fortunes to charitable causes instead of stockpiling it for heirs. For Buffett, money was never the end goal. It's a tool of influence that, in his own philosophy, does far more real good in the world when directed at solving concrete problems, poverty, healthcare, education, than it would sitting in an enormous, unearned inheritance handed straight to his children. He said more than once that the right amount of money to leave children is enough that they feel they could do anything, but not so much that they feel they could do nothing. Wrap up. Let's bring all 10 facts together, because individually, each one is just an amusing detail, but together, they add up to a complete philosophy of life. 1. He still lives in the house he bought in 1958 for $31,500 and has no plans to move. 2. He eats roughly the way he ate at age 6, hamburgers, ice cream, and about 5 cans of Coke a day, saving a couple of dollars on breakfast on days the market doesn't behave. 3. He plays the ukulele purely for his own enjoyment, all the way up to the stage at annual shareholder meetings and charity events. 4. He spends up to 12 hours a week on the card game bridge, having played with Bill Gates for decades. 5. He reads up to 5 hours a day, and far from just financial reports, history books, biographies, and all sorts of other subjects. 6. He uses a simple rule of 25 and 5 items to stay laser focused on what actually matters, ignoring everything else entirely. 7. He goes to bed early and never tackles hard problems in the middle of the night, a routine he's kept for more than 60 years straight. 8. He used a $20 phone for years and drove a car with a thrifty license plate for a decade, instead of status gadgets and supercars. 9. His one genuine luxury is a private jet, a purchase he himself once jokingly called internally conflicted, naming it first the indefensible and later the indispensable. And 10. The most important one, he's giving away 99% of his fortune to charity, rather than leaving it to his own children as inheritance. The real lesson across all 10 of these facts is fairly simple. Even if it's not obvious at first glance, one of the richest people on the planet deliberately chose a life without unnecessary complexity, status objects, or showy luxury. Not because he couldn't afford it, but because he learned firsthand that none of it actually makes life better. Extra decisions, extra possessions, and extra obligations only quietly drain the energy and attention that could be better spent on what actually matters, whether that's work, relationships with the people you care about, or the simple things that genuinely bring you joy. Leave a comment and tell me which of these 10 facts surprised you the most, and whether you'd try applying even one of his principles like the rule of 25 and 5 in your own life. And if you want to learn more about how the richest people on the planet actually live and think about money, subscribe, because there's a lot more of this coming.